Ethan had no intention of halting, not for the tempest, not for the recollections, and certainly not for the antiquated roadway that still bore the burden of his past. But then he perceived him, a delicate German shepherd lying inert beside the highway. A single utterance altered everything, a name, a glance, a narrative that recollected. What ensued would unravel years of quietude, deceit, and a connection that never perished. This transcends a mere reunion, it is a truth awaiting discovery. The rain descended in relentless torrents as Ethan Brooks gripped the steering wheel more firmly, his eyes fixed on the serpentine road carving through the valley of Jackson, Wyoming. It had been years, 15 to be precise, yet this locale still possessed the ability to constrict his chest without consent. Mountains loomed like memories, and the air, dense with pine and storm, felt excessively familiar. He was not present for sentimentality, he was there to sign a few documents, resolve a land dispute that had been interred as long as his family, and depart before the phantoms grew any louder. Fate, however, as it invariably does, had alternative arrangements. As he turned onto Route 89, the headlights illuminated something peculiar ahead, a dark form, motionless. He decelerated, his wipers struggling against the downpour. And there it was, a German shepherd, frail and drenched, lying at the road's edge as if the world had already relinquished him. Ethan's foot slammed the brake. He stepped out, rain hammering his shoulders, and approached cautiously. The dog didn't run, didn't flinch, he just turned his head and looked directly into Ethan's eyes. There was no aggression, no fear, just recognition. That kind of gaze doesn't originate from instinct, it comes from history, from something unfinished. "Hey, buddy." Ethan knelt slowly, his heart thudding. The dog's ribs pressed against his skin like broken scaffolding. His paw was twisted, his coat matted with mud. And yet, something about the way he tilted his head pulled Ethan deeper into some forgotten warmth. And then he said it, "Scout." It slipped out, a name buried under a decade of silence, a name no one else had used since the day his life split in two. The dog didn't just react, he answered, a faint wag, a quiet whimper, as if that single word had reached through miles of abandonment and yanked him back into the light. Ethan froze. For a second, he forgot the rain, the pain, the years. All he saw was him, the one living thing that hadn't forgotten. That tail wasn't wagging from instinct, it was memory. It was hope. Carefully, Ethan removed his jacket and wrapped it around the trembling animal. The dog rested his head on Ethan's arm as if he'd been waiting for it all along, just relief. Ethan lifted him gently and placed him in the passenger seat of his truck. The dog didn't move, just stared out the window as if watching a world he never thought he'd return to. As Ethan shut the door and slid behind the wheel, something shifted. The road ahead wasn't just asphalt anymore, it was a path back through a story he thought was over. And somewhere deep inside, a question had already planted itself. Why here? Why now? Why him? And even deeper than that, why did they tell me he was gone? The rain persisted as Ethan navigated into the gravel expanse of a weathered roadside lodge nestled just off the riverbank. He hadn't reserved a room, nor had he planned to prolong his stay. Yet plans, it seemed, were no longer relevant. The dog remained curled in the passenger seat, enveloped in Ethan's damp jacket, his breathing shallow but consistent. Each jolt in the road caused him to flinch, each flicker of lightning appeared to draw his gaze towards some distant, intangible memory. He was not merely injured, he was exhausted in a manner no medicine could remedy. Ethan checked in with little more than a nod and a credit card. Room 4, ground floor, proximate to the door, convenient for carrying. He didn't inquire about pet policies, he didn't care. The lodge exuded a faint aroma of aged wood, heating oil, and something sweet, maple, perhaps. It felt like an old quilt, worn but familiar. He laid the dog on a folded blanket by the baseboard heater and observed the steam rising from his wet fur. Like breath from a weary soul. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, it was ponderous, deliberate. Ethan moved slowly, drying the dog's coat with a towel, examining his paws, carefully inspecting the matted fur for deeper injuries. The dog offered no resistance, no whimpers, merely watched him, his eyes wide and still, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that resembled recognition mingled with a hint of disbelief, as if he didn't fully trust the reality of this moment. Ethan placed a bowl of food and water beside him. The dog touched neither. His ribs were sharp beneath his skin, his hip bones jutting as if sculpted from hunger and loss. Still, he didn't cry, didn't beg, he simply remained like someone who had already learned that asking never altered anything. Ethan slumped into the room's sole chair and stared at the space between them. "I don't know what this is," he muttered, half to himself, half to the storm raging outside. "But if you're who I think you are, then someone lied." The dog blinked slowly, then shifted, just barely, to rest his paw against Ethan's boot. That small gesture struck harder than any blow. It wasn't random, wasn't accidental, it was a choice, a signal, a quiet confirmation that whatever remained broken between them was not beyond mending. Unable to shake the weight in his chest, Ethan leaned forward and whispered, "Is it really you?" The dog didn't move, but his eyes didn't leave Ethan's. They remained there, steady, with a softness that defied the years and distance between them. When dawn finally fractured the sky, its initial light spilled into the room like a slow admission. Ethan rose to open the curtains. That's when he saw it, etched faintly into the dog's collar, half concealed beneath years of grime and mud. Buckley, a town nearly 50 miles distant, a direction Ethan hadn't considered in years. Why would someone take him there? Why would they rename him? Questions coiled in Ethan's gut like smoke. This wasn't just a lost dog, this was a trail, a message left in plain sight. The dog finally lapped a little water from the bowl, slow and cautious. Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because even as the dog took his first sip of comfort, Ethan knew they were only scratching the surface. Someone had buried the truth and the dog had survived it. Now it was Ethan's turn to excavate it. The subsequent morning, the clouds had dispersed, but the inquiries had not. Sunlight crept through the window as if reluctant to be present, casting a soft illumination across the blanket where the dog lay. He stirred slowly, his legs tucked beneath him like a soldier safeguarding a memory. Ethan knelt beside him and observed as he ate a few cautious bites of food, as if still uncertain whether it was permissible to feel secure. Ethan required answers. He grabbed the crumpled note on which he had scribbled the name, Buckley, and set out with a clear purpose, stopping first at the town's veterinary clinic. A middle-aged woman in scrubs, Dr. Caroline Foster, greeted him with a skeptical expression that softened the moment Ethan explained the situation. She leaned over the counter to study the dog's eyes, murmured something soft he didn't quite catch, and then led them into the back. The examination was thorough. 14, maybe 15 years, she stated. Unusual for a shepherd to reach this age, especially in this condition. But his heart's holding on barely. He's got something worth fighting for. Ethan glanced at the dog, who looked back as if he already comprehended everything they were still attempting to piece together. Has anyone brought in a dog like him from Buckley? Or used that name, Buckley, for an owner or tag ID? Ethan asked. Dr. Foster accessed her records, clicking through months of logs, then years. She shook her head slowly. No matches. No adoptions filed under that town. If he came from there, he left no footprint. Ethan thanked her, left his number just in case, and stepped out into the early afternoon breeze, his mind spinning like a dislodged gear. Something didn't align. The dog's collar, the new name, the distance from Buckley to Jackson, someone had made a deliberate decision to move him. To conceal him. But why? On the walk back to the lodge, the town began to take notice. A mechanic outside the garage dropped his wrench when the dog limped by and just muttered, "Well, I'll be." A woman folding laundry on her porch whispered under her breath, "Looks just like that dog. The Brooks dog from way back." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't stop walking, but his ears caught every word like barbs. Back at the lodge, Ethan sat on the bed while the dog lay near the heater. He opened his laptop and began sifting through every public shelter record he could locate for the county surrounding Buckley. He traced transport logs, scanned photographs, and reviewed lists of dogs marked as unadoptable. He found nothing until he delved deeper into a public PDF scanned from an old archive. In the corner of one document, intake number 491, German Shepherd, adult male, untagged, listed as aggressive, recommend transfer or euthanasia. There was no photograph, just a note, one name scribbled in the margin, transferred. Transferred to where? That night, Ethan drove his truck towards the only place he hadn't dared to revisit, the old Brooks family home. The driveway was overgrown, the windows boarded, but the frame still stood, stubborn and sad. He parked, stepped out, and stared at the porch. The dog looked up, then, without hesitation, climbed down from the truck, walked slowly to the steps, and sat. He didn't sniff the ground, he didn't search the yard. He just looked at the door, and then softly he whimpered once. Just once, like a sound from a place no one had been able to reach in years. A retired mailman wandered by with a grocery bag and stopped. Didn't think I'd ever see that dog again, he said. Ethan turned. What do you mean? Your folks' place, the man said, pointing at the house. That dog came back here every day after the crash. Cried on that porch for days. Then one day he vanished. I figured he gave up. But Scout hadn't given up. Someone had taken him. And now the silence wasn't just sad, it was suspicious. Ethan stood before the storage unit, keys trembling in his hand, not from the cold, but from the weight of something deeper pressing down on him. The metal door groaned as it rolled upwards, revealing boxes that smelled of dust, rust, and a decade of avoidance. Old furniture leaned at forgotten angles, filing boxes warped from years of neglect, a fishing rod snapped in half. He stepped inside, the air heavy with silence, the kind that tastes like old grief and unopened answers. He located it in the far corner, a dented green metal cabinet with a broken lock, the same one that used to sit in his father's garage, next to the red toolbox and the bucket of cracked tennis balls for the dog. Ethan crouched low, pulled it open, and started sifting through layers of paper, old receipts, faded photographs, and bent license plates. That's when he saw it, a yellow envelope curled at the edges, sealed with tape. His name was written in sharp, uneven strokes, Ethan. But the handwriting wasn't his father's, nor was it his mother's. He held it up to the light and felt his breath catch. It was Martin's. Inside were 2 sheets of paper. No greeting, no apology, just a story told in mechanical sentences. After the crash, Scout became unmanageable. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't let anyone near the house. We made the decision to transfer him to a behavioral facility near Buckley that handled trauma cases. He was listed under intake number 491. We hoped someone would adopt him. I didn't want you to know. You were dealing with enough. Ethan blinked hard, the words swimming. It wasn't fate. It wasn't tragic timing. It was a choice. Scout. No. The dog hadn't run away. He had been taken, sent off like a piece of broken furniture, hidden like a secret no one wanted to face. And the line that followed felt like it punched through his ribs. I never checked to see if he made it. The words felt like betrayal carved into stone. He stumbled back out of the unit, the letter clutched in his hand, the dog watching him from the truck with a look that understood far more than it should. Ethan got behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. He sat in silence for a long time, the weight of it all pressing into his chest. For the first time since finding him, he couldn't look the dog in the eye. That night, back at the lodge, Ethan barely spoke. He sat on the floor beside the dog, holding the letter like a lifeline that had been frayed for too long. The dog, still recovering but stronger now, nudged Ethan's leg and placed a paw on his knee. No judgment, just presence, as if saying, I'm still here. Ethan exhaled. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. His voice cracked under the words. The dog didn't move, didn't need to. It was enough that he stayed. Something had shifted. The narrative had cracked open. This wasn't about a dog who disappeared. This was about someone who survived what others turned their backs on, who waited, starved, limped, and somehow still believed someone would come. Ethan wasn't sure what haunted him more, the years he lost not knowing, or the realization that the dog had lived through all of it alone. But now he wasn't alone, and Ethan wasn't leaving without the truth. Somewhere out there was a facility, a file, a name, a decision. Someone had saved the dog from being erased completely, and Ethan was going to find out who and why. Ethan sat by the window long after the sun dipped behind the Tetons, gazing into the kind of darkness that doesn't merely envelop the sky, but seeps into one's being. The letter from Martin lay on the table, tattered at the edges from excessive readings. Each word carried weight, yet it wasn't the deception that crushed him. It was the years, the sheer number of sunrises and storms the dog had weathered without a voice to articulate or a hand to hold. And now, here he was, stretched out on the lodge floor, breathing slowly, shallowly, beside a heater that hummed as if it recalled the meaning of warmth. Ethan observed him closely. The dog's eyes were closed, but they did not rest easily. His paws twitched intermittently, his ears flicking as if attuned to a frequency no one else could perceive. There was pain in that stillness, not merely physical but something older, a kind of waiting that had endured for too long. When Ethan reached out, the dog stirred, opened one eye, and lifted his head slightly. He placed a paw on Ethan's knee and left it there, not for balance, not for affection, but for something deeper. It was forgiveness without words, a message conveying, I knew you'd come. That single moment fractured something wide open. Ethan had spent years suppressing emotion behind logic, burying hurt beneath work, paperwork, and miles of asphalt. None of it mattered now. This dog had waited longer than most people would, and despite the scars, the hunger, the betrayal, he had never truly surrendered. Ethan remained on the floor that night, curled near the dog like a child attempting to memorize safety. He didn't sleep. He listened to the rhythm of a heartbeat that had no business still beating. In the silence, he whispered, I'm going to find out everything. No more running. By sunrise, they were already halfway to Buckley. It wasn't a glamorous journey, just long stretches of cracked roads lined by pines and ghosts. Ethan's hands stayed firm on the wheel, his jaw clenched as if bracing for answers he wasn't prepared to hear. Every time he glanced over, the dog met his eyes. Not begging, not questioning, just watching, as if ensuring Ethan wouldn't disappear again. At the Buckley Municipal Records office, a board clerk gave Ethan a raised eyebrow when he requested animal intake archives. "That's not public," she stated, tapping her keyboard as if it owed her rent. Ethan slid the letter across the counter, folded just enough to reveal the transfer line. Her expression shifted. "Wait here," she said. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thin folder, smelling of basement and regret. Intake number 491. Male German Shepherd. Age, adult. Temperament, guarded. Status, euthanasia recommended. Ethan's throat tightened, but one detail stood out. In the margin, transfer denied. Keene. Ethan blinked. That name, Daniel Keene. He flipped to the next sheet. A release form with a scribbled signature and a short note. Dog refused food. Would not interact. Taken home for extended care. No address, just a town, Teton Village. It was enough. Back in the truck, Ethan exhaled and glanced at the dog. "We're getting close," he said. The dog didn't react much, just rested his chin on the dashboard, looking out at the road as if it had always pointed to this moment. Ethan didn't know who Daniel Keene was or why he had intervened when no one else had. But someone had made a choice to keep the dog alive when everyone else had signed off on letting him fade. That meant something. And deep down, Ethan hoped, no, needed, that it meant this wasn't just about loss anymore. This was about everything that was still possible to reclaim. The road to Teton Village curved as if attempting to conceal its secrets a little longer. Pine trees flanked the narrow highway, dusted with fresh snow from the previous night. The sky was washed in that pale blue hue one only sees when the cold is just beginning to assert itself. Ethan spoke little. The dog sat upright in the passenger seat, more alert now, his ears twitching with every shift of the wind, as if he could feel it. Whatever awaited them was not merely a destination. It was something that had been accumulating for years. The address originated from a property tax search. One match, a cabin registered to a Daniel Keene, now in his 70s, retired. No phone number, no public record of occupation. Just a name, an old shelter file, and a flicker of hope Ethan dared not articulate. The cabin was nestled between towering trees and shadowed hillsides, the kind of place where sound vanished. The truck's tires crunched over gravel as Ethan parked. He could barely discern the windows behind thick frost and a dense thicket of shrubs that appeared to have grown untamed for a decade. He stepped out, the dog beside him. The door opened before he could knock. Daniel Keene was tall but stooped at the shoulders, his beard a wild scattering of white. His eyes, however, were sharp, and when they landed on the dog, they transformed. They didn't just recognize him. They remembered him. "You brought him home," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, uncertain, and followed him inside. The cabin was modest. Firewood stacked neatly by the hearth, boots drying near the door, a rocking chair beside an old flannel blanket. Everything smelled of pine and burnt coffee. Daniel knelt slowly, painfully, and met the dog's eyes. The dog stepped forward, gentle, almost reverent. No barking, no growling, just quiet acknowledgement. Two souls meeting after years of surviving in silence. "I thought he was gone," Daniel said. "After he ran off that last time, I figured he finally gave up." Ethan looked at him. "He wasn't yours, was he?" "No, never was. He was always waiting for someone else." They sat at the kitchen table as Daniel poured lukewarm coffee into mismatched mugs. His story unfolded in pieces, fragments shaped by guilt and love. The dog had been marked for euthanasia, too damaged, too distrusting. Daniel had seen something different. He didn't growl, didn't snarl, just sat in that cage, staring out like he was waiting for a door that would never open. So Daniel opened it, took him home, named him nothing, let him be. But the dog never settled. He'd escape at night, always east, always towards Jackson. Daniel would find him miles down the road, staring at empty highways as if expecting someone to arrive. He carried a picture in his collar, Daniel said. Found it tucked in his fur the day I brought him home. Looked like it had been there a while. He stood, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small photo wrapped in plastic. Ethan froze. It was him, barely older than 20, standing beside the dog in front of the old Brooks house. It wasn't posed, just a moment frozen in time. Daniel placed it in Ethan's hand without a word. Emotion surged like a wave. Everything he'd buried was now staring back at him from a faded photograph, a reminder that the dog hadn't just survived. He had remembered. He never let me throw it away, Daniel added. Kept hiding it under his bedding, like he knew it mattered. They sat in silence. Ethan glanced at the dog, now curled by the fireplace as if he'd finally reached the end of a map. There was peace in his posture, stillness, not from exhaustion, but arrival. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. He had spent so long wondering whether he'd imagined the connection, whether time and loss had warped the memory of what they once shared. But now, sitting in a stranger's cabin, holding a photo that had traveled through more than any person should endure, he knew. The dog hadn't waited by accident. He had waited for him. The drive back to Jackson was quiet, but Ethan's thoughts were anything but. The photograph Daniel had given him felt as if it were burning a hole in his jacket pocket. He couldn't stop contemplating everything that had come to light. How a stranger had protected what his own kin discarded. How the dog had survived year after year, fueled solely by memory. And more than anything, how the answers kept circling closer to something no one had dared to articulate. By the time he reached town, dusk had painted the sky in deep indigo. He didn't return to the lodge. He drove directly to Martin's office. Martin was still there, hunched behind a desk laden with manila folders and tax forms, his glasses low on his nose. He looked up, startled, when Ethan stepped inside, the dog close behind. "I need you to tell me the truth," Ethan stated, placing the photo on the desk. "All of it. No more softened versions. No more excuses." Martin stared at the picture, his face drained of color. His hand trembled slightly as he pushed his glasses up his nose and leaned back in his chair. "Where did you get this?" "From the man who saved him after you threw him away." Martin closed his eyes. "I didn't throw him away. I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Martin sighed. "From the guilt. From what that dog knew." That stopped Ethan cold. "What do you mean?" Martin hesitated, then stood and walked to the file cabinet in the corner of the office. He unlocked the bottom drawer, pulled out a small box, and set it on the desk. Inside were old keys, receipts, and a flash drive. "He wouldn't stop scratching at your father's office door," Martin said. "Every night, same spot, always whining. I thought he was traumatized, grieving, but something felt off. I opened the office one day, and there were claw marks on the floor by the desk." Ethan picked up the drive. "I didn't want to believe it meant anything," Martin said, his voice quieter now. "But I found that after the accident, and I couldn't handle what it might lead to. So, I sent the dog away." Ethan's knuckles went white as he clutched the drive. "You buried it. You chose to forget." Martin didn't deny it. Back at the lodge, Ethan sat at the small table, his laptop open, the flash drive trembling in his hands. The dog lay nearby, his eyes heavy but watchful. The room felt frozen in time, waiting. He clicked the file. Security footage flickered onto the screen, grainy, time-stamped from the night of the accident. His father's office. A shadow moved across the frame. Not his father, not his mother, a man in the corner of the frame. The dog barked from behind a glass door, frantic. The man placed something beneath the desk. Minutes later, lights off. The figure slipped out the back. Hours later, the crash. Ethan froze. He rewound, paused, zoomed. He recognized the man. A family friend, a partner in the business. The same man who had assisted with the funeral arrangements, who had cried beside him, who had gone on vacation with them the year before. And the dog had seen him, tried to warn them, scratched and cried and waited. And for that, he was silenced. Ethan sat in the dark, the screen casting shadows on his face. The dog stirred, walked over, and rested his head on Ethan's knee. It was a quiet gesture, but it conveyed everything. He had never stopped trying to tell the truth, even when no one listened. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel lost. He felt furious. He felt focused. He felt ready. The silence they'd been forced to carry, man and dog, was over. And the truth, it had waited long enough. Morning light painted the mountains gold, as if the world itself were finally prepared to reveal the truth. Ethan stood on the porch of the lodge, a cup of untouched coffee in hand, his other hand resting on the dog's back. They both stared at the horizon as if it held the next step forward. Something about the silence felt different now, less heavy, more resolute, the kind of quiet that follows after a storm has spoken. The video was delivered to the sheriff's office that morning. No drama, no fanfare. Ethan didn't seek revenge, he desired closure. The sheriff, older and wiser than he let on, watched the footage with a clenched jaw and uttered one thing: "We've waited long enough." A formal investigation was initiated within the hour. Ethan didn't linger to observe the machinations of justice, he didn't need to. The truth had finally been articulated aloud. What had been buried, dismissed, and pushed into silence by fear and convenience was now out in the open. The man responsible would face what was coming, not because Ethan demanded it, but because the dog, without words, without protest, had never ceased pointing towards it. Later that day, Ethan drove to the old family house one last time. It hadn't changed, still worn down, still leaning under the weight of memories, but it didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt honest. And somehow that was harder. The dog stepped out of the truck with a steadiness Ethan hadn't witnessed before. He walked to the porch, climbed the steps, and sat the exact spot where he had once waited for someone who never came. This time he wasn't waiting, he was home. Ethan joined him, sitting beside him with the quiet reverence of someone standing inside a church. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo, the one from Daniel's cabin. He laid it down between them. "You brought me back," Ethan said. "You remembered what I forgot, and you held on to it long enough for both of us." The dog leaned against him. No dramatic gesture, no significant movement, just warmth, just presence. That same weightless kind of loyalty that defied logic, time, and distance. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel as if he owed the dog an apology, he felt as if he owed him a life. And from that moment on, he promised it would be one the dog never had to escape from again. They moved into a small house just outside of town, a quiet place near the edge of the forest where the dog could breathe and Ethan could sleep without nightmares. Each day was simple: walks, warm food, mornings with the scent of pine, and evenings with stars that blinked like old friends returning. Neighbors called them inseparable. The dog never strayed far, Ethan never needed to raise his voice. The bond between them wasn't trained, it was born in fire, rebuilt with silence, and sealed with forgiveness. The dog grew older, slower, but not weaker. His steps lost speed, but his gaze never dimmed. And on one soft morning, after a walk through the frost-kissed meadow behind the house, the dog lay down on the porch, his head in Ethan's lap, and simply didn't get back up. There were no sounds, no finale, just peace, the kind of peace earned through storms, carried on the back of survival, and delivered by a love too stubborn to quit. Ethan sat there long after, his hands still resting on the dog's fur. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He whispered only one word: "Thank you." And the world, in its strange, sacred way, felt still. Because sometimes the one who was forgotten returns not to be remembered, but to remember.